días para que se sienten, porque si no, pero póntelo para que se... Hola, muy buenos días a todos. Vamos a dar comienzo a nuestra segunda jornada del Congreso. Muchas gracias por ir ocupando vuestros asientos. Sabemos que está diluviando en Madrid y probablemente haya sido difícil la llegada. Voy a recordaros a todos que la conferencia va a ser en inglés, por si alguien necesita coger el dispositivo para la traducción simultánea. Y nada, perfecto. Este silencio es perfecto para empezar y para presentar y dar la bienvenida a nuestra primera ponente de hoy. Ella es Cristina Da Milano y viene del ECCOM. El ECCOM es un centro europeo para la organización y la gestión cultural. Ella es miembro desde el año 1996, pues casi desde su fundación, y desde el año 2010 está en la presidencia. El centro, el ECCOM es un centro formado por distintos profesionales de distinto ámbito y que promueve un enfoque interdisciplinario a las organizaciones culturales, a quienes ellos ayudan, entre otras cosas, fundamentalmente con proyectos de investigación. Precisamente Cristina Da Milano ha participado y ha desarrollado en estos proyectos de investigación que están especialmente ligados con la formación del educador y con los procesos de formación continua en los museos. Así que nos interesa muchísimo su punto de vista. Va a ser un enfoque institucional que precisamente pone en valor y tiene en cuenta la función del educador. Muchas gracias y bienvenida.
Thank you, Ángeles, and thank you to all of you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here with you to share my thoughts and my experiences within this specific sector. I'm sorry I do not speak Spanish, so I will speak English, but since I'm not David Anderson and I'm Italian, I guess my English is much easier for you to understand, so probably you won't even need the translation, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, as Ángeles said, I work for ECCOM, which is, let me see if it, yes. It's a research center based in Rome, which I contributed to found in 1995. We are a group of people with different backgrounds. I am an archaeologist as a background, and then I studied museum studies at Leicester University in the UK. My colleagues have different backgrounds. They are art historians, sociologists, economists, and we have a, let's say, transversal approach to cultural heritage and cultural heritage studies, which is what we do mainly. So we do research, training, and consultancies in the field of cultural heritage. So now I've been invited here to talk with you, to have a discussion about the issue of the social role of museum, or, well, the role of museums in contemporary society. So first of all, let me tell you that my contribution will be mainly divided into two parts. The first part is a bit more theoretical, so I ask you for some patience, but I think it's necessary to set a theoretical framework. And then I will present to you some practical cases, practical experiences in which I've been directly involved, which actually tried to go towards the direction set by the theoretical framework I will present to you. So let's start our journey. I'll try to keep the time. And well, actually, I'll start with a question. Why do we talk about a new role of museums in contemporary society? Why do we have to talk about that? Well, there are some documents, some policy documents that actually frame the question, in my opinion, very well and very clearly. So I prepared for you just 4 of them, to be brief, but there are many of them, as you know. So yesterday, this one has been mentioned quite often by Vincent, by David, so I thought it was worth it just, you know, to have a look at it, to refresh our memory. The famous Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community. First one. Second one, you know that by heart, so I'm not going to stop on that, apart from the fact that every time I read it, I am really amazed by the orange words. I think these are the most important words in this declaration. You might disagree with me, but that's my, let's say, point of view. So museums exist in the service of society. So this is again a very nice framework, theoretical framework for our discussion. The third one is the Pharaoh Convention. I don't know if you are familiar with that. This is a document published in 2005 by the Council of Europe, in which it is clearly stated that the value of cultural heritage should be that of being used as a resource for sustainable development. I'm not particularly fond of the definition sustainable development. I will use today with you the word sustainability, which to me is much clearer and much more adherent to our scopes and our cultural vision, let's say. But in 2005, they still use the word sustainable development. But anyway, the important point here is that cultural heritage should be used for sustainable development and quality of life. So again, a nice theoretical background. Last but not least, this is a very recent document. It's a joint communication published in June 2016 by the European Commission for Culture and the European Parliament. It's a joint communication in which it is clearly stated that Europe's experience of diversity and pluralism is an asset to promote cultural policies as drivers for peace and socio-economic development. Again, we could discuss many of these issues, but they set the framework quite clearly. So the social role of heritage, and of course of museums as part of heritage, is really clearly stated in many European and international documents. Then everything is fine, you might say, and well, sometimes I also think we have these beautiful documents, everything should be fine. We shouldn't need anything more than that. But, it's true that these documents are all, let's say, converging towards individual and social sustainability to be achieved also through culture. So not only economy, not only the social sphere, not only the environment, but also culture as one of the pillars of sustainability. It's true that they clearly define this goal. But are we really achieving this goal? How far we are from achieving this goal? That's my main question for you today. Our society is changing, and is changing very, very quickly. So it's a matter of being ready to respond to changes, I think. And yesterday, Vincent mentioned some dramatic changes. He talked about violence, and I agree 100%. But even if we narrow the scene to our cultural world, we still see that there are many changes going on and that we are confronted every day with different challenges. Some examples. The first one is an example based on data. Data show that only a very small percentage of people participate in cultural life. In Europe, the percentage is about 30% in the 27 European countries. Of course, there are differences between the north and the south. We all know that. But the average data tell us 30% of people participate. And those 30%, as David Anderson was mentioning yesterday, is made of people like us. So well-educated, with a decent income, well, I mean, in the cultural field, well, yeah, okay, we know what we mean. Anyway, we are privileged to many respects. We are a privileged part of society. And we know that, and we are those who participate in cultural life, mainly, broadly speaking. Then, of course, there are exceptions. So data already tell us that we have a problem, and we also know that from practical things. I live in Rome. I am an archaeologist, as I told you, and it happens to me to go around in Rome with people from abroad. In July, I was with an American friend. We went to the Colosseum in the morning. In the afternoon, we went to visit St. Peter's. And then she said, "I'm sorry, I really appreciate what you tell me, but I have a problem. I don't understand which one was built before." And to me, that was a shock, because of course I took it for granted. I mean, to me, it was obvious that the Roman Empire was before Renaissance, you know? And in a way, it is a cultural challenge for us. And to go on with nice examples, Roman numbers. 20. I've heard 20 being called XX in Italian or XX in Spanish. I've heard people at the National Gallery in London asking the guide, "What does Flemish mean?" The guide had been talking for ages about Flemish paintings. And then this girl said, "Sorry, but I don't know what Flemish mean." And the guide got mad, actually. I mean, she had a very strange reaction. But, you know, or in a scientific museum, in a natural history museum, I witnessed a discussion between biologists and people from other cultures saying extinction does not exist, evolution does not exist. Our Western European scientific thought is based on Darwin and evolution. So hearing someone who tells you evolution and extinction do not exist, it's a challenge. And sometimes the way they respond to this challenge, the response to it, is maybe worse than the questions themselves. Talking about Roman numbers, in June, a small archaeological museum opened in Rome, in the city center, in the area of the Foro Romano. And since I wrote a book about writing museum text in a simplified way, which is something that many archaeological museums actually do not do. So I was working with the director in writing labels, and I told her, why don't we explain Roman numbers? Of course, in an archaeological museum, Roman numbers are everywhere in the texts. And I said, why don't you open a bracket and write in the brackets the Arab numbers, or at least a period, but in Arab numbers. And she said, oh, but they have to know Roman numbers if they come here. I said, yeah, okay, but how do they know, how do they learn? Because the idea was they have to learn, we have to teach. Perfect. How do you teach if you don't give people a code to translate the XX in something different? And she had a reaction. I will never forget it in my life. She looked like, one of those actresses in the black and white movies. She was like, oh, but this is so stressful. I dream a museum where only art historians and archaeologists go. And I thought, okay, that's the problem. This is exactly the problem, that you dream of a museum for art historians and archaeologists. So, I mean, these are anecdotes, but I think they give you the flavor of what I mean when I say that we are confronted with challenges, with cultural challenges. And how can we deal with these challenges? With the fact that we have now confronting ourselves with different cultures, and I'm not talking only of migrants, of course, but of people coming from the other part of the world. They have different backgrounds, and they have different ways of understanding the world. And the world is no longer a Eurocentric world. So we have to deal with this. We actually tried to deal with this. We started in the 50s, I would say, and we are still doing it now. There are three main models. We are still in the theoretical part, so forgive me, but it will be quick. The first model was the model of access development. It was developed in the 50s, in the 60s, in France, by the Ministry of Culture, André Malraux, who was the initiator of this view of opening culture to everybody, the idea of democratization of culture. And one of the fruit of this policy was actually the Centre Pompidou that yesterday Vincent mentioned several times. So this idea of breaking barriers and making culture accessible for everybody. But this model proved to be a bit limited. It didn't fully work. So we moved towards another model, the model of socio-economic development. This is the basis, for example, of the European program of the capitals of culture. So the idea that culture can activate socio-economic processes and become part of a more complex development. Bilbao and the Guggenheim are, I think, the most quoted example in literature when we think about this model. Now we are striving, I would say, with the third model, which is the model of cultural democracy, which mainly tries to combine the previous two that I mentioned, and it is based on three very, very important issues. So this is the Trinity, not the Holy Trinity, but the Trinity, very, very important. Access, participation, representation. These are the three pillars of the model of cultural democracy. Let's skip access for now, because access to me is the most important, so I will dedicate to it some more minutes. Participation, what does it mean? It means much more than we can think at a first glance. It's not just participation in cultural activities or in the creative processes, which is already something very important. The whole issue of co-creation is a great challenge for cultural institutions. And I guess you are very well aware of that. But it also means participation in decision-making processes. And this is even a bigger challenge for cultural institutions, which have always thought to be the only one to decide about culture. Now, if we have to involve people in decision-making processes, do you understand that the shift is not so easy to be achieved? But this is what really participation means. Representation, what does it mean? It means being open to represent not only our traditional European-centered view of the world, but also other cultures, and also to be ready to reimagine, reconsider, reanalyze our European culture with different eyes. So it's a matter of discussing. It's discussing evolution, which doesn't mean that we say, yes, okay, evolution does not exist. Of course, we think evolution exists, but you have to open up the discussion at least, and then probably people will remain of their own ideas and will never find a balance. But the dialogue is at the basis of this idea of considering, reshaping our knowledge. But now, let's talk about access. As I told you, to me, this is the most important of the three. Why? Well, access can be declined in different ways. The first one that comes to mind is physical access. Sorry, economic access, obviously. It's the price of tickets. We all know that economic barriers exist and that we can facilitate access to some groups of society by changing or removing the price of the tickets. And we have been doing a lot to this respect. In many European countries, there are specific policies for specific groups, so I'm not going into details here. The other two aspects where we have done a lot are physical access, and you all know we have been working hard on physical access for visually and hearing impaired people, to remove architectural barriers. I would say that the cultural sector is quite at a good point, let's say, to this respect. Geographical access, which might be a problem in some areas, is also something that we are coping with quite well. So transport, facilitation to reach a place when the place is particularly difficult. There are strategies, there are ways of doing that, and we are actually doing that quite well. What worries me is this one, is the Roman numbers, the word Flemish, the evolution. This is the real problem to me, cultural access. Because we can manage to bring thousands of visitors in our museum, but what worries me is what they bring back when they go out. That's the point. It's not to take them in. Of course, it's nice to sell tickets. I'm not saying that it's not nice. It is, and it's important. But what's important is the communication of the meanings and of the values that museums preserve. And this is where we are not doing so well, in my opinion. Of course, there are examples of good practices, but we still have a long way to go. Now, in the last 15 years, I've been working with European programs and European funds. Now, we can think whatever we want about Europe. I personally think that we need, in this historical moment, more Europe and not less Europe, but that's my personal view again. Anyway, what I like about Europe within our field is that after having set beautiful theoretical frameworks, some of them I presented at the beginning, they also put in practice programs through which you can actually try to achieve concrete results with respect to those frameworks, to those policies. And the programs I've been working with are the lifelong learning program, the Erasmus program, the culture program, which now became Creative Europe, and I guess you're all familiar with them. They prove to be very effective tools to try to realize something practical after having read many theoretical, nice words. Of course, competition has become very, very hard in the last 3 years because national resources are shrinking, so everybody is trying to get European resources. So it's getting more and more difficult to have these funds. And that's a problem for sure, but still, I think the process is a virtual one. So these programs that I mentioned tried to set some strategies. How can we try to achieve this goal of cultural access, of real democratization of culture? Actually, the European Union is focusing on some issues. Visitors and non-visitors analysis. This is a very important issue. Gathering data about visitors and about non-visitors. And data doesn't mean only numbers, but means mainly motivation. Why do people don't visit? Why they don't find us interesting? These sort of analyses are really pushed by the European Union. Partnerships. If you want to be relevant for society, you have to create partnerships with other organizations, other institutions who work in society, and not just stay on your own in the ivory tower where many museums still want to stay. Third point, removal of barriers, economic, geographical, physical barriers. But as I told you, I think here we are doing well, so I wouldn't really focus on that. Staff training. I mean, if you want to talk with diverse groups, if you want also to act in terms of social impact and social inclusion, you need to train staff. Because most of you are educators, I guess, and I guess most of you have a disciplinary knowledge in art history or archaeology or I don't know what. But you need many other competences to be ready to confront yourselves with the diversity which we were mentioning before. So staff training should be one of the focus of cultural institutions. Evaluation. Okay, I know this is a tricky word because we always talk about evaluation and then not all of us really do evaluation in a proper way. Evaluation, it's also a matter of accountability. You evaluate what you have done and you have to be ready also to confront yourselves with, let's say, unexpected outcomes and results, or with failures sometimes. So evaluation is crucial to this process. Now, as I said, the European programs which focus on these issues, they also give you the chance of doing something very practical on that. And I've been lucky because in the last years, in the last 15 years, I've been part of projects funded by these programs, which were really practically trying to tackle these issues. I brought here for you just a few examples with websites indicated, so if you want, you can go on the website and gather more information. At the end, you will see also my email address. So if you want to know more about the projects, I'm here for you. So about visitor and non-visitor analysis, this was a very important project for me. It was called Brokering Migrants' Cultural Participation. Why was it important? Because it was funded not by the DG Culture of the European Union, but by the DG Internal Affairs of the European Union. What does it mean? Well, it means that the European Union recognized culture as a field where some internal problems, such as migration, refugees, and all the crises that we are witnessing in our days, can be solved. I think solved is much a bigger word, but anyway, can be tackled, let's say, also by cultural activities. This is a very important recognition. The project, of course, analyzed why migrants do not participate in cultural life in the countries where they arrive. And I mean, the responses were different according to the country. Spain was also one of the countries involved. So on the website, you will find the research, the studies, the peer-to-peer training courses that we developed. A lot of interesting materials on that. The second thing, which is something I am currently involved, it's a study on audience development commissioned by Creative Europe. I am part of a working group, of course, and we will deliver the study in January, so we are almost there. And it was very interesting. We actually, well, as researchers, obviously, we set first some bibliographical references and definition of terms, and this quite theoretical framework again, but then we analyzed 30 case studies all over Europe of cultural organizations which put audiences at the center of their activities. How do they do it? If they succeeded, more or less. And in the end, the study will provide also a guide for cultural institutions on how to develop an audience development strategy. It's been a very interesting experience. In Spain, we analyzed the auditorium in Tenerife, was one of our case studies, and the second one was Mercat de las Flors in Barcelona, as organizations which are really putting visitors, public, at the center of what they do. Very few museums actually responded to our criteria. So we selected 30 case studies after having received more than 100 proposals. But very few museums could be selected among the 30s because they didn't really put audiences at the heart of their activities, unfortunately. Talking about staff training, this was another wonderful project I had the honor of being part of. Spain was also one of the countries involved. It was called Museum Mediators. And it was actually based on the idea of creating a training format for museum mediators to be replicated in different European countries by the same group of teachers, lecturers, okay? So the format was the same, the people were the same. Of course, there were some adaptations to the local context. And we worked in 5 countries. In Spain, we did it in Barcelona with the University of Barcelona. And the goal was exactly that, of training museum staff, educators, to be able to act as bridges between the museum and the society, composed by different groups, by different kinds of visitors. Okay? It was really very interesting. On the website, you find the course reader, which is a summa of the lectures, the contents, and the results that we achieved. So it's something that might be maybe worth a reading. And the last one is a project I also loved very much. It's called Diamond. It's an horrible acronym, so I'm not going to tell you why, but it has to do with dialogue and things like that, but it's really incredible. Anyway, let's call it Diamond, which is much better. And, well, the goal of Diamond were multiple. The goals were working in partnership with social institutions, like refugee centers, centers for elderly people, prisons, so different components of disadvantaged part of the society, let's say, of product some data. Evaluation was a very strong part of this project, not just numbers, but qualitative evaluation. I think yesterday it was Paula who said, even if it was one visitor, it was enough. In this case, we were working with small groups of people, but numbers were not so important. And the third aspect was that of the removal of barriers. How did we do that? Well, we used a tool that I highly recommend for you to try. it's digital storytelling. It's a combination of storytelling, which is, of course, the self-biography process, which is a powerful engagement tool, as we all know, combined with the digital part. So what happened here? Mainly three things. The museums went outside their walls to try to meet these people who normally do not visit museums, okay? So we went outside. We spent some time with them. There were some meetings outside the museums. Then we invited them to come to the museum. Of course, those who could. Prisoners couldn't, but the others could. So we invited them to come and visit the museum. And this was, again, a repeated process. Then they were invited to express their own personal experience about the museum, what they thought, what they felt. And I would say invariably always the story that they told using the digital mean always ended up with personal memories. So the connection was immediate. The museum, the collection, an object, personal memories, personal stories, which connected the individual to heritage, to that particular piece of heritage. And then the relationship was created. And these people kept and keep on coming to visit the museum, feeling at home there. Of course, it's a long time process. It's a time-consuming process. It took us from 8 to 10 months to have the first stories realized. But the results, I will show you something about it. I think it's really worth it. We focused on learning. Of course, I mean, we never forgot that learning is one of the core core goals of museums. So learning was a very important part of it. And I really loved the last. I thought I knew everything about animals. Now I realize I didn't know anything. I think this is great. I mean, this is really, you know, the change of perception and attitude that each of us would like to happen in a museum. Another aspect which was really very important was fun. If you read these sentences that we used, of course, for the evaluation, it was fun, it was beautiful, enjoyable. I felt at ease and happy. I put my heart into it. What does it mean? Well, this tells us about engagement, personal engagement. So not only learning, but really creating a personal relationship with people who had never been before in a museum. I think it's something we should, you know, think about. Now I'll show you one of the stories. We digitalized 120 stories in 3 European countries. Again, Spain was one of the partners, the Science Museum in Valencia. Sandra Illobre is here. I don't see her now, but I mean, she was one, here she is, she was one of the partners of this project. So 120 stories. I'll show you one of them. The guy is a refugee. He speaks in Italian, very, well, bad Italian. There are English subtitles, but the story is very easy, so I guess you can understand it even without the translation, reading the subtitles.
Mi piacciono tanto sono quelle del Museo di Ecologia, perché mi piace quello che facciamo e mi vuole il tempo. La cosa che mi ha colpito è stato il serpente e il cranio della scimmia, perché mi sembrava un bambino. Mi sono ricordato dell'Africa perché c'ho animali e lo so come si curano. Vedendo i cavalletti mi sono ricordato una volta in cui ho chiesto a una cavalletta dove andare. Essa con la zampa mi ha indicato la strada. Nel mio paese i cavalletti si mangiano. Si prende uno stecchino, si cuociono, si mangiano e mi piacciono troppo.
So you see here, as I told you before, the animals were sort of pretext to start remembering about his country. The cultural shock of knowing that they eat grasshoppers was quite tough, also for museum educators to, relate with this discovery that grasshoppers can be eaten. And a very interesting implication was that when he said the grasshopper, I asked it for the direction, where to go, and it told me which way to go. Do you know the story of Pinocchio? There was a cricket telling Pinocchio where to go. So there are some, we'll say, cultural, yes, pardon? Grillo, yes, cricket, yes, very well. And so there are contamination, let's say, in European cultural and anthropological tradition, also with Mediterranean ones. So it was really interesting, and it's 1 minute of story where you can find so many different points of view to be explored. So these examples of practical projects, to me, go exactly towards the direction I showed you before, individual and social sustainability that can be achieved through culture. And this is again something which has to do with museums. Yesterday, David Anderson said, one of my favorite, or one of the most important people in my life was a woman, I don't remember the name. To me, it was Alma Whitlin, and the book she wrote in the 70s, where she wrote this sentence, which, I would have liked to show it to the director of that archaeological museum. I didn't have it written, or I didn't have the book with me that day when she said only archaeologists and art historians should visit museums. To me, museums are exactly that. I share this vision. They are not end in themselves. They are means in the service of society. Because if we consider them ends in themselves, then we limit their value, to me. And of course, this doesn't mean that we don't recognize the importance of these activities. Of course, museums serve society because they preserve, they conserve, they communicate, they make research. This part is the basis of each museum work. We are not denying it, but museums can do much more than that. They can, provide a welcoming atmosphere. They can help creating social relationship. They can improve the quality of life of people and provide enjoyment. And the word enjoyment immediately is linked in my mind to a video that I will show you now. I'll tell you what it is. It's something that the Rijksmuseum organized just before the reopening in 2013. And you might argue that this is just marketing or communication, but marketing and communication are part of the process. So I think we are just discussing the same issue here. Enjoy it.
Shoppers in the Dutch city of Breda get more than they bargained for after actors storm the shopping centre dressed in 17th century outfits. From ropes and jumping from balconies, the group was staging a reconstruction of Rembrandt's painting The Night Watch to promote the reopening of the Rijksmuseum.
that great. I mean, it's really of course it's marketing, but it's, I mean, it's also very well linked with society, with people. I mean, people were happy, were laughing, were enjoying it. So, I mean, there are implications also towards the way we intend marketing and communication. Now, I'm over. I want to leave you with this thought. Why? Well, because I think we have a clear direction. We know where to go, or where we should go. But actually, the pathways that we can follow to reach that goal are so diverse. They depend on each of us, on each museum, on each professional. We have many different options. I just presented here to you some of them. But of course, I mean, we are creative people, so I guess that the possibilities are thousands. So I don't have a recipe. I just think that knowing the goal, which is that of becoming relevant for society, we can then find our own ways to achieve that goal. I close here. This is my email address. If you have questions, well, I'll be here today, but if you have questions in the next days and you feel like emailing me, please do that. Thank you very much.